Some controls in information security seem niche until a crisis exposes how foundational they are. Precise timekeeping and disciplined handling of privileged utilities fall into that category. They do not block packets, encrypt payloads, or dazzle boards with dashboards. Yet they quietly determine whether evidence is believable and whether safeguards can be bypassed. Accurate clocks underpin log correlation, audit trails, regulatory attestations, and forensic timelines. A few seconds of drift can scramble causality and invite disputes. Privileged utility programs, meanwhile, are the master keys of operating systems and platforms. Diagnostic, debugging, and administrative tools that can read raw memory, rewrite configuration, or copy vast data sets in moments. ISO highlights these controls together because they close subtle gaps adversaries love. Ambiguous timestamps that weaken accountability, and powerful utilities that, if unmanaged, can tunnel under other defenses. Treat them as reliability controls for the entire ISMS. They make records trustworthy and ensure extraordinary power is visible, justified, and contained.
Annex A.8.17 sets a clear expectation. All relevant systems must synchronize to reliable, authoritative time sources so that logs, alerts, and evidence align across environments. The purpose is far more than neat timestamps. It is about making distributed systems speak a common temporal language so investigations can reconstruct events faithfully. Authentication failures on an identity provider, configuration changes on a firewall, and data access in an application should sort naturally into a single storyline rather than a jumble. In regulated sectors, from capital markets to healthcare, timestamp accuracy also underwrites transaction integrity and patient safety documentation. Even routine operations benefit. Correlation queries run faster, alerts trigger in the right order, and service-level calculations reflect reality rather than clock drift. Time, in this context, is not a convenience, it is a control.
Practical synchronization hinges on resilient methods and verifiable trust. Network time protocol remains the workhorse, but modern deployments increasingly prefer authenticated variants such as NTS to prevent spoofing or man-in-the-middle manipulation. For facilities where precision or independence matters, GPS receivers or connections to national timing services and atomic clock sources provide Stratum 1 reliability. Enterprises rarely rely on a single source. They deploy multiple internal time servers, paired with diverse external authorities, and segment them by region so latency does not introduce jitter. The blueprint is a hierarchy, a hardened core of reference servers, a mid-tier of distribution nodes, and edge systems that consume time locally. Each layer serves accuracy, performance, and integrity, so that a compromise or outage in one path does not scramble the entire environment's sense of now. Security is inseparable from synchronization, so the time fabric must be defended like any other critical service. Time servers should authenticate their upstream sources and present certificates to downstream clients, with strict ACLs preventing arbitrary hosts from advertising time. Administrative access requires MFA and change control, and configurations are versioned to detect unauthorized tweaks. Network segmentation limits exposure of NTP/NTS to only the subnets that need it, while rate limiting prevents amplification misuse. Monitoring adds a second line of defense. Drift graphs, offset distributions, and alert thresholds reveal spoofing attempts or failing oscillators quickly. In short, the time service is treated as a protected utility, not a casual background demon. Operations teams translate design into reliability with ongoing checks that keep clocks honest. They schedule periodic verification of offsets across representative hosts and devices, comparing them to reference sources and documented variance limits. Alarms fire when drift exceeds thresholds appropriate to the business. Sub-second for trading engines, seconds for general enterprise workloads. Central dashboards expose synchronization status by site and platform, so a failing Stratum 1 source stands out before it corrupts thousands of timestamps. Because dependencies fail, fallback strategies are explicit. If external sources drop, internal references take over. If GPS is jammed, network sources prevail. If a distribution tier falters, clients fail to a secondary pool automatically. These routines turn precision into a habit. Auditors expect evidence that time accuracy is intentional, measurable, and controlled. Policies specify approved sources, authentication requirements, and acceptable variants per system class. Configuration records show which servers act as time authorities and how clients are pointed to redundant pools. Sampled log excerpts from disparate systems demonstrate alignment, identical sequences around critical events rather than contradictory stories. Test artifacts document offset measurements during drills, while incident records show how detected drift was contained, corrected, and prevented from recurring. This body of proof turns "our clocks are fine" into a verifiable assurance that supports investigations and compliance attestations. When synchronization fails, the consequences extend beyond aesthetics into accountability and defense. Incident responders can no longer correlate intrusion steps across hosts. The order of privilege escalation, lateral movement, and data exfiltration blurs. In financial or legal contexts, disputes arise over the timing of orders, approvals, or contractual milestones, eroding trust and inviting penalties. Monitoring systems missequence alerts, hindering triage and allowing attackers more dwell time. Worse, adversaries may exploit timestamp manipulation to falsify provenance or to hide tampering within retention windows. A few misaligned minutes can translate into days of forensic uncertainty, a costly ratio in any breach. Precision timing is not limited to data centers. It is embedded in industry operations where seconds, even milliseconds, matter. Trading platforms synchronize to millisecond accuracy to ensure fair sequencing of orders and to satisfy market regulations. Hospitals align medical device logs and electronic health records so that clinicians and investigators can reconstruct care paths without ambiguity. Telecommunications networks require consistent timestamps for call detail records and interconnect billing, where drift can become financial error. Government agencies stamp classified data trails to preserve chain of custody in sensitive operations. Across these examples, time is not ornamental metadata. It is the backbone of process integrity. Annex A.8 turns from chronology to capability, focusing on privileged utility programs, tools that can override controls, peer into memory, rewrite configuration, or move data at scale. They include OS-level shells and editors, registry and kernel manipulators, packet analyzers, disk imagers, and powerful backup or migration tools. In the right hands and contexts, these utilities are essential for diagnosis and maintenance. Unmanaged, they become a short ladder over the organization's highest fences. The control objective is not prohibition, but governance. Define which utilities exist, who may use them, under what conditions, and with what level of recording and oversight. By treating utilities as controlled substances rather than casual convenience, the ISMS keeps extraordinary power visible and bounded. Risk arises because privileged utilities circumvent the very safeguards that normally enforce policy. A root shell ignores application permissions and file-level DLP. A memory dumper can capture secrets never written to disk. A packet sniffer bypasses encryption at endpoints and reveals sensitive payloads in staging networks. A backup tool can exfiltrate terabytes under the guise of maintenance. Even well-meaning technicians can misconfigure systems during hurried troubleshooting, causing outages that cascade through environments. Attackers, once inside, actively seek these utilities to entrench persistence or to harvest credentials. Recognizing this dual-use nature is the first step toward responsible control. Effective governance begins with inventory. Organizations catalog every privileged utility in sanctioned images, golden AMIs, jump hosts, and administrative laptops, including versions and hashes. Installation and execution are restricted to approved administrators through allow lists, signed binaries, and application control. Usage is never invisible. Session recording, command logging, and keystroke capture on Bastion hosts create a replayable record of actions tied to an individual identity. High-risk tasks, raw disk imaging, kernel debugging, live packet capture on production segments require pre-approved change tickets and time-boxed entitlements. These measures do not slow legitimate work so much as they replace secrecy with stewardship. The environment around privileged utilities must also be engineered for safety. Administrative access occurs through hardened jump hosts with MFA and just-in-time elevation rather than from everyday workstations. Data captured by diagnostics is encrypted in transit and at rest, labeled per classification, and stored in segregated locations with automatic expiry. Network zones used for deep troubleshooting are isolated to prevent accidental broad capture. Where possible, safer surrogates replace invasive tools. For example, eBPF-based observability that minimizes data exposure or privacy-preserving packet metadata instead of full payload capture. Design choices reduce the blast radius before policy even enters the scene. Auditors look for a paper and technical trail that proves control without ambiguity. They expect a documented inventory of privileged utilities mapped to owners and approved use cases, access rules that specify who may install and invoke them, and logs or recordings that show who used which tool, when, on what system, and for what authorized purpose. Change tickets and approvals tie extraordinary actions to business justification. Monitoring dashboards highlight anomalies, utilities appearing where they do not belong, execution outside maintenance windows, or sudden surges in diagnostic data volumes. Together, these artifacts demonstrate that power is allocated, supervised, and reviewable. History offers too many reminders of what happens when privileged utilities run wild. An administrator uses a hex editor to bypass application controls and adjust a ledger entry off the books. An unlogged packet sniffer on a shared switch captures customer credentials during a troubleshooting session and the PCAP file leaks. A technician, rushing to fix a storage problem, writes the wrong device and corrupts production configurations. An attacker discovers a forgotten vendor tool with broad privileges and uses it to escalate quietly for months. Each incident shares a theme. The tool worked exactly as designed. Governance failed to keep it in its lane. In specialized sectors, these controls take on domain-specific nuance. Cloud providers lock down hypervisor debugging interfaces so only a tiny, cleared team can access them under dual control. Hospitals constrain diagnostic utilities on clinical systems to prevent exposure of protected health information during support sessions. Telecommunications operators limit packet analysis to accredited staff and approved taps with strict masking of subscriber identifiers. Energy companies restrict SCADA maintenance programs, executing them through jump hosts with continuous recording and immediate post-session review. The pattern repeats. Capability is essential, but only with commensurate oversight. Accurate clocks and governed utilities reinforce each other in practice. When every privileged action is time-stamped against a trusted time fabric, accountability becomes non-negotiable. Reviewers can reconstruct sequences, compare them across systems, and distinguish legitimate maintenance from malfeasance. Utility logs, session recordings, and change tickets align naturally with SIM timelines and incident chronologies because drift is under control. Conversely, robust utility governance ensures that the very tools which could alter logs or replay events are themselves constrained and recorded. The result is a virtuous loop of traceability, in which evidence is coherent and powerful tools are accountable. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Annex A.8 demands careful attention, not because it is flashy, but because it governs the invisible levers that keep technology stable and dangerous if uncontrolled. Privileged utilities are essentially backdoors built into systems by design, intended for diagnostics, maintenance, or data management. ISO requires organizations to recognize this duality and implement strong, layered controls to ensure that extraordinary capabilities never operate outside authorization or oversight. By establishing these boundaries, organizations prevent administrative shortcuts and adversarial abuse from undermining the integrity of the ISMS. These utilities can make or break security. When managed responsibly, they accelerate recovery and troubleshooting. When left unchecked, they create unmonitored pathways for manipulation and data theft. Understanding the categories of privileged utilities helps shape policy and defense. At the operating system level, utilities like root shells, registry editors, or sudo commands grant elevated privileges that override normal permissions. Diagnostic and debugging tools dig even deeper, reading raw memory, intercepting kernel calls, or bypassing application layers to isolate issues. Network analysis programs, such as packet sniffers or protocol analyzers, can see unencrypted traffic and extract confidential data in seconds. Backup or migration utilities move vast data sets, often including regulated information, and can therefore become unintentional exfiltration tools.
Even firmware updaters and system recovery environments carry similar risks because they operate outside the normal control framework. Recognizing this ecosystem is the first step toward governing it comprehensively. The risks linked to these utilities are wide-ranging and often underestimated. Insiders might misuse powerful tools to hide unauthorized changes or harvest data while maintaining plausible deniability. Attackers who gain administrative footholds often deploy legitimate utilities known as living off the land techniques to blend in with routine operations and evade detection. Even well-meaning technicians can accidentally trigger outages by executing diagnostic commands on live systems without testing. In environments with external service providers, unvetted third-party tools can introduce malware or bypass segmentation controls. The common thread is that every privileged utility, by definition, can override existing safeguards, meaning governance must substitute for trust. ISO therefore mandates a multi-layered control structure that balances operational necessity with rigorous oversight. Access to install or execute privileged utilities must be limited strictly to approved personnel, ideally through just-in-time elevation rather than standing admin rights. Organizations should maintain a complete and regularly reviewed inventory of all privileged utilities in use, noting their purpose, version, and authorized owners. Logging and monitoring are mandatory. Each invocation should record who used the utility, when, on which system, and with what result. Session recording technologies provide even richer evidence, capturing keystrokes or screen activity for forensic review. For high-risk tools, such as memory dumpers or packet analyzers, advance approval or formal change tickets must be required before execution. This framework transforms utility use from ad hoc convenience into a structured, reviewable process that aligns with the principle of least privilege. Evidence of compliance with A.8.18 centers on visibility and accountability. Auditors expect to see documented policies defining acceptable utilities and explicitly prohibiting unsanctioned ones. The organization should be able to produce an up-to-date utility inventory mapped to responsible individuals or teams. Access control lists, privilege management configurations, and session logs demonstrate enforcement. Corresponding change tickets or approval records confirm that diagnostic work was planned and justified. Monitoring dashboards highlighting anomalies, such as new utilities appearing unexpectedly or tools executed outside scheduled maintenance windows, prove that oversight is continuous rather than occasional. The presence of these records provides assurance that privileged utilities are tightly governed rather than informally tolerated. The consequences of ignoring this control can be severe and often make headlines when they surface. Consider an administrator using a hex editor to modify data directly within a production database, bypassing application logic and validation controls, an action that may introduce corruption or fraud. In another case, a technician activates a packet sniffer on a live network segment without authorization, inadvertently capturing customer credentials and sensitive data. Elsewhere, an engineer troubleshooting a server overwrites configuration files, causing widespread outages because rollback procedures were absent. Attackers have exploited forgotten diagnostic binaries left on systems to escalate privileges silently, operating under the radar for months. Each scenario underscores that the tools themselves are neutral. It is their governance that determines whether they serve resilience or risk. Different industries implement these controls with specialized rigor reflecting their risk landscapes. Cloud providers, for example, severely restrict hypervisor debugging interfaces, ensuring that only a small, dual-authorized engineering team can use them under strict change management. Healthcare organizations control diagnostic utilities on clinical and medical devices to prevent exposure of protected health information during maintenance. Telecommunications companies allow packet analysis only for accredited staff using sanitized outputs that redact subscriber identifiers. In the energy and industrial sectors, SCADA maintenance programs are confined to isolated zones, executed through jump hosts with continuous video or keystroke recording. Across all industries, the pattern remains constant. The higher the utility's privilege, the stronger the controls surrounding its use. The connection between A.8.17 and A.8.18 becomes particularly powerful when viewed through the lens of accountability and forensics. Accurate, synchronized time ensures that every use of a privileged utility can be traced and correlated across systems. When logs from multiple servers align to the same trusted clock, investigators can reconstruct precise sequences of administrative actions, distinguishing legitimate maintenance from abuse. Conversely, robust utility management ensures that the tools capable of altering system state, or tampering with logs, are themselves controlled and monitored, reinforcing the reliability of time-stamped evidence. Together, these two controls create a closed accountability loop. Reliable time validates trustworthy records, and restricted utilities prevent those records from being rewritten.
Their synergy becomes invaluable during investigations, audits, and post-incident reviews. A synchronized timestamp allows analysts to match a specific administrator session with an observed anomaly across different systems, while privileged utility logs provide detailed context for what happened during that session. This intersection of precision and governance ensures that an organization can answer critical questions: who acted, when, from where, and with what impact, without gaps or ambiguity. Forensic reliability depends as much on temporal integrity as it does on operational control, and these two annexes together supply both.
By embedding the principles of A.8.17 and A.8.18 into daily operations, organizations reinforce two quiet pillars of security maturity: trust in evidence and trust in control. Synchronization ensures that every record has meaning in time. Utility governance ensures that every privileged action has meaning in context. Combined, they create a digital environment where nothing important happens without trace, and every trace carries irrefutable credibility. These controls may not be as visible as firewalls or encryption, but they form the hidden framework of reliability beneath them. A reminder that true security is not just about stopping attacks, but about preserving truth in how systems record, recover, and prove what actually happened.